anyway, they, Seabees dug a great big bomb shelter for Betty Hutton and her troops in case we had an air raid, and we even had air raids after she left. But in case we had an air raid, so their whole troop could be ushered into those bomb shelters. They were pretty effective, big ones. Although there were 3,000 of us sitting out there, we didn't know what we were going to do with that air raid. But that was not their concern. But anyway, it was a great show, and I was able to see it because I was sitting there in the hospital bunch. Now we're going to talk about Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima, probably, well, most of the generals said it was one of the worst, it was the worst battle we had in the Pacific. There's Moriyama #1 is the airport there, and there's another airport there. There was one that was being built, and the Japanese had fighter planes on this island, and they were picking off our B-29s as they would fly from Tinian to Japan. Unbelievable. And that's where our air raids were coming from on Saipan. They had the Japanese bombers, and they flew off Iwo Jima. And in order to take Iwo Jima, this is the weaponry we had to face. These are gun emplacements. All those black dots are gun emplacements. Thousands. They were all over the island. There's a 600 or 540 foot hill there, that's Suribachi. There's a 350 foot hill here. We landed in that area, and everybody that hit and stayed on the beach got caught in a crossfire. And from here and from Suribachi. So what happened was, all the tanks of our company that were supposed to land, go inland 100 yards, couldn't even make up the grade. It was a 16 or 18 foot hill of nothing but volcanic ash. That's all it was. And we could not, it was like trying to walk in a green bin. So we had immediately had the orders to go to what I call it Plan B, but it was called something else. But anyway, we went there, we got on the beach, and we just got up halfway up the hill, and a whole bunch of tanks were with us. We got a radio message to do the other thing, and we backed off, and all that day then, and all night, we circled Suribachi and fired at gun blasts. These guns were firing down on the troops anywhere anybody was moving or wherever, and so we were out here floating in that area. It was rough sea, and we couldn't hit much. We probably wasted 11 out of 12 shots with our 75 millimeter, but we figured out a way to do it. And that whole night, if we happened to see, I was on a bomb machine gun, and if the tank was facing facing the hill, and I would fire tracers, a tracer every third round in my machine gun, and I could see where they were going, and I wasn't trying to hit anybody, but I was trying to tell the gunner where that flash was, and it seemed to work pretty well because then he'd throw a phosphorus shell up there and hit Suribachi, and it would light up the area. And then if you got a chance, you could throw some high explosives up there. We went through over 190 shells out of the 75 millimeter. I don't know if we did any damage at all, but that was what about 8 or 9 of our tanks were doing that night. Other tanks left and went back to the ships, or they ran out of gas and got picked up by Navy guide boats because if they run out of gas, the bilge pump doesn't work, and they'll sink. So we had a lot of losses that first day. The second day, we went in. We were able to go, but we've been taking so much small arms fire that night. They hit our tracks a lot and knocked a lot of those little things that propel you in the water. So we had a kind of a tough time getting aboard shore, but we went back and we wanted to get more fuel and ammunition in there. deck officer was there, not in that tank, so they had brought 8 tanks in on reserve at that time, so for the rest of the time, I spent with 28th and 26th Marines. We were up there helping this part of the area, wherever they needed, whatever they needed. And that any one of our tanks was available for anybody. It was a kind of a screwed up mess, but eventually 23,000 enemy were taken out of commission, and the island was ours. Now, the guys at A Company and B Company, I landed up in this area. They could drive right on. There was no big steep hill or anything like that. And this is what happened to them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, I don't know. I circled as many as I could see. They took a beating. Those tanks got, and there's one, Lena Horn got hit just coming in the shore. And they took a terrible beating. And nobody anticipated that. As that black area there was the worst possible area during that first day. So you look at the slide up there, that's D-Day. The 5th Marine Division was here, and that's what we were attached to. The 3rd Marine Division was in here. And okay, then the D+3, they had advanced this far. Now, you know, this is only 5 miles from there to there. And Iwo Jima was taking 100 yards at a time. But I said it's taking 100 yards at a time, and at night we gave them 50 yards back. So that's about the way it was taken. It was just death and destruction, 360 degrees around you. There wasn't any rear area, really. It wasn't big enough for a rear area. So one of the things that I showed you earlier was that slide with a whole bunch of gun emplacements. They had about 100 of these tanks. Instead of using those land tanks, they buried them with a bulldozer, but not deep, not too deep. They just buried them so that the gun emplacements stuck out. And they were intended to be beach defense along this area here. They had over 100 of these tanks buried like this, and we were instructed to take them out every chance we get, but we couldn't figure out why they weren't firing at us. And they were really there for beach defense, but everything worked on them, and so we had blown up 2 or 3 of them and blew the turrets off them. And on one case, there wasn't any enemy around. We went over and looked, and there wasn't any crew in it. They had abandoned every one of those tanks. And the reason they did, we didn't attack from this side. We attacked from over here. So since this was not going to be the assault wave, those gun emplacements were no good. They could have been. They could have been terrible if they'd have stayed there, but we figured that the crew members, whether they were ordered to or not, they went down underground, and just left them there. There is part of a diagram, and it's so hard to read. You almost have to tell, on the original, you have to have your glasses, but there are 3 and 4 layers, 2 and 3 and 4 layers of caves and tunnels, and this happens to be the hill on the, if you remember that picture on the, okay, that's Suribachi. This is what you're looking at right now, this section here. That's what you saw. Big cliffs and tunnels that went for miles through that thing. I say miles, it went forever. They had cafeterias down there, they had hospitals, they had medical treatment, they had light bulbs, they had air, everything. That's the way they were going to live underground until we got tired of fighting. Apparently that was it. But they came out of, now incidentally, there is a